Hi good people, Titus here for another Blender tutorial, and in this video I'll show you how to create a simple skeleton rig so you can begin to animate your models. There are dozens of great add-ons to help speed up this kind of workflow, my favorite being the Rigify add-on, but in this tutorial we'll keep it simple and just walk through the manual process. Let's not waste any time and jump right into it. Okay, so in this example I'm going to be modeling Qbert here. Qbert's made of two parts. He's got his base mesh, and then we modeled some eyeballs. So to begin, we're going to press, well, actually let me press my options menu, and let me make sure my screencast is turned on. There it is. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to press Shift A. We're going to add an armature. If you have the Rigify add-on or some other add-ons, you might see multiple options. Just choose the single bone option. All right, and it's going to add a bone into our scene. If we come into the data properties here, there's a viewport display. You can expand that out. You can change the bone types. We got octahedral, you got stick, you got B-bone, envelope, and wire. Some people like B-bone. For this example, I'm going to stick with octahedral though. I also recommend checking the box for in front, so it's easier to see the bones as you're working with them through your mesh. I'm also going to turn on names, and I'm going to turn on the access as well. The other thing I'd point out, at least with the octahedral, the flared part of this bone type is going to be called the head, while the smaller end is going to be called the tail. That'll actually be important and come up a little bit later, and I'll call that out. All right, so to start, I'm going to press G to grab, lock in the Z axis. I'm just going to put the base of the head or the tailbone there, and then I'm going to tab into edit mode, and then in edit mode you can actually select the little circle part at the head level, or you can select the circle at the tail level, and you can extrude from those regions, or you can select the entire bone by clicking in the middle. There's a few ways to do this. You know, there's no right way or wrong way. You can kind of do it just whatever you prefer, and I'll kind of show you different ways to do it throughout this rigging process. So if you're here, I'm going to grab the top of this bone, come into front view, just press G to grab, Z to lock it in the Z axis, and drag it to the top here. Then I can select the entirety of the bone by clicking in the middle, right click, and do subdivide. And typically, I think for this example I'm going to do 3 just to make it kind of a little bit easier to manage. But depending on what you're rigging, if you have any like references, you typically kind of want to make your skeleton, you know, similar to your references. The more bones you have, the more accurate and the more control you're going to have over your rig, but also you're going to increase your workflow because you're going to have more things to rotate, move around, and also fix and weight paint. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But all right, so we got our spine set up here. Now let's work on, I'm going to do the character's left leg. So I can select the root bone here, press Shift D, and I'm going to place the tail of it, or sorry, the head section right there. And then I'm going to click on the tail and press G and just grab it down, kind of like so. I'm going to come to my side view, and then I'm going to select the bone, grab in the Y, and just kind of place it like that. I think now's a good time too. I'm going to select the bottom part of the root bone or the pelvis, and I'm going to grab in the Y and just kind of do that. And then for the top, I'll also grab in the Y. That way you just kind of have the spine shape here. Coming back to the leg, I'm going to select the bottom circle, press E to extrude. I'm going to extrude that down the leg. And then I'm going to extrude again to do the foot or the ankle. And then I'll extrude again to do the toes. And I think that looks pretty okay for right now. There is a problem with this though. if you notice, typically what you want on your rig, I want to be able to grab the leg and I want to manipulate it separate from the spine. But when we come into pose mode, and you can do that by pressing Control Tab and then selecting pose mode. If I select the root bone, which in our case is going to be the pelvis, when I grab and try to manipulate or move it, it should move the entire skeletal rig. So everything pretty much should be parented to a single control bone. Now you don't have to make it the pelvis bone. A lot of people, when they do their rigs, they'll do like a control bone down here, and that's easier to grab. It just won't have any deformations on it. And in fact, you can have multiple controls throughout a rig, but you should probably stick to one root bone. So we're only going to have the one root bone, but we actually are on this rig going to have multiple control points. But all that's being said is when I grab this, it should be moving the legs, and it's currently not. But when I do it in edit mode, I should be able to grab it separately. So the way to do that is you can select the thigh bone here, and then shift select our root bone and press Control P, and we're going to parent and keep the offset. And you can see this relationship line gets created here. So now when I grab this, it's not going to move it, which is perfect. And if I move it from the leg, it keeps it separate. But if we Control Tab and go into pose mode, if I grab the root bone, it moves the entirety of the rig. And that's what we want. But if I grab the leg bone, it doesn't. So you're looking for that kind of behavior. So I'm going to tab back into edit mode. And I think this is a good place where we can begin to start naming our bones. To keep a good, basically, structure. I'm going to change the name of my armature. I'll press F2, and I'm just going to call it Skelly. And then for this bone, I'll press F2. I'm going to call this Root. And F2, I'm going to call this Spine 01. And then F2, I probably could have just called it Head, but that's fine. We'll do Spine 02. And this one, I'm going to actually do a little bit different. I'm going to call this thigh, and I'm going to do a capital L at the end to signify that this is the left leg. The reason I'm doing that is to make my life easier. Blender has a symmetrize option. If you use the capital L or the capital R designation, it'll symmetrize and create the other bones for you, just to save you some time. So I'm going to select this bone. I'm going to call this leg space capital L, and it does have to be capitalized. And then F2, I'm going to call this one foot, capital L. This one, I'll just call it toes, capital L. All right, and that looks pretty good. So now when we go into pose mode here, currently our Skelly rig is being driven through what's called forward kinematics, or FK. So you can select bone, press R to rotate, and then it's going to rotate kind of down the line depending on where your controls are placed. It's a very basic form of animating. Sometimes it's helpful to have inverse kinematics. So rather than being driven from the head down, it's driven from the tail up. So inverse, basically, that's where you get the name. And I think most rigs will probably have a mix of both. So you have some items that are forward kinematics and others that are inverse kinematics. For this one, I'm going to set up inverse kinematics on the leg, but I will drive the spine and the toes, or essentially the feet, through forward kinematics. So let's go ahead and set that up. Go back into edit mode, come into side view. I typically will place my control bones at the point where I want the inverse kinematics to start. So I want it to start at the leg. So I'm going to come down to this piece here, press E to extrude, lock it in the Y, and I'm going to select this bone, and I'm just going to F2 to rename it. I'm going to call this controller with a capital L, because we're going to have a right and a left leg controller. Now the reason we need a control bone is because we need a way to manipulate the inverse kinematics easily. You don't have to do this. It's just easier when you're animating and you're setting up like your keyframes to be able to have the bone easily grabbable or selectable. You typically won't, it won't have any mesh deformations on it, and you're not going to see it in engine anyways. So you don't really have to worry too much about it. But right now, in order to make this control bone work, I need to be able to grab it, and I need the grab to not influence or basically modify these bones here. So the way to do that is I can press Alt-P and do clear parent. So now when I grab it, it's its own little piece. And then I can right click and just let it snap back into place. Now to actually drive the inverse kinematics, we have to go to pose mode. I don't know why you can't do it in edit mode. I think it's strange, but I guess it kind of makes sense. I'm going to select the bone I want the inverse kinematics to start on, which remember was the leg. So I'll highlight that, and I'm in pose mode, which you can come from here, select pose mode, control tab into it. And then you'll notice this menu called bones constraints actually comes up. So we can select that, and if you search, there's an inverse kinematics option. So we can select that here, and then we have to give it a target. The target's going to be the armature. So in this case, it's going to be our skelly armature. The bone is going to be the controller bone. So in this case, we called it controller L. And we have to set up a pole target. That'll come in a little bit later. But just with that, it's going to work, but there's going to be an issue with it. And let me zoom out. I'm going to select my controller, and when I move it, you notice it moves the entirety of the rig, which I don't want. I only want it to influence these two bones here, just the leg bones. So I'm going to select back into here. For the chain length, I'm going to just bump that from 0, which is infinity, or the entire rig, to just 2. So now when I select here, you'll notice it just moves the leg, which is pretty good. And animating with this inverse kinematics, especially for like legs and arms, it's just way easier than forward kinematics. I mean, I guess it's just practice or whatever you're good with. You may prefer one way versus the other, but typically you'll find you're using a mix of both, but some things are easier than others. Now for this, I want to drive the feet with forward kinematics, and right now it's using inverse, so I need to fix that. But before we get on to the feet, let's do the knees, because right now I don't have a way to control where the knee socket points to well, so this can kind of be a little bit annoying. So we need another controller bone, or a pole facing bone. So what I can do is go back into edit mode. I like to come from the knee joint, and you can press E to extrude, Y to lock it in the Y axis. I'm going to select that bone, F2, and I'm going to call this pole, and then a capital L, because we're going to have a right pole and a left pole for the legs. And then, same as before, it's a controller bone, so I need to be able to grab it and manipulate it without it modifying the skeleton rig directly. So we press Alt-P, and we do clear parent, and now I can actually select and move it forward. And now it's kind of locked it in the Y-axis there. So now, if we go back to our leg, and we have to do this in the pose mode, I have it selected. You notice we have this pole target. If we click in here, we have to give it the armature, which if you remember is the skelly. That's whatever you called the armature up here. And then the target bone is going to be our pole L. Now, your armature mesh might be fine, or it might kind of shift or jar. And I think it has to do with the local axis of the bone, how it's facing, but regardless, if the pole is slightly off, there's an adjustment pole angle. Usually just modifying it by 90 degrees in some, like either negative 90 or positive 90 or 180 or 270, whatever it is, in some increment of 90 should get it to move in the correct orientation. In this case, it looks like it's going to be moving 90 degrees. And now, just with that, I can not only select my piece here, and it moves correctly still, but I can select my knee, and I can point my kneecaps easier. And this is just, like I said, it just makes it easier when you're animating and rigging, if you have a way to turn the knee at a certain point. So that's all this really is. Just making your life easier. If you're in pose mode and you need to get rid of some grab, scale, or rotation, you can press Alt-R to clear any rotations, or Alt-G to clear any grabs, or Alt-S to clear any scales. And that'll get you set back to how your mesh was before. But that sets up the inverse kinematics. The last thing I want to do with the foot is I want it to be driven through forward kinematics. So I'm going to tab back into edit mode. In order to do this, I need to select this bone, and I need to press Alt-P to clear the parent. So now when I grab this piece, it's not going to modify it. And because of that, I can come into this bone now. I can add a bone constraint. Again, this has to be done in pose mode. And I'm going to give it a copy location. And then I can simply target the armature, which is Skelly, and target the bone, which in this case is going to be the leg L for left. Now you'll notice it jumps up to the head of the bone. And we need it to be at the tail. So there's a slider here. You can just drag this down to 1, and that'll move it to the tail. And now, if I grab this, the foot will follow, but if you notice, it doesn't mess with the rotations. So I can control the foot rotations through forward kinematics rather than inverse kinematics, which is what I want. Because I want the feet to be planted. Where that comes into play, or when it's helpful, is with like squats. So if you're trying to make your character do squats or whatever, it's typically easier with the feet planted anyways. But there is an issue. If I select my pole target, you probably figured this out, my foot isn't following it. Well, we can come back into the foot bone here, or the start of the chain, and we can add another constraint called copy rotation. So you may be asking, well, why did we get rid of inverse kinematics if all we're doing is following the rotations as well? Well, the reason being is because we can target the armature, target the leg, and now I can check off X and Y and only do the Z. So I can control the rotation separately. So now if I grab this, you can see the foot still locked. I can rotate the foot through forward kinematics like I want. But at the same time, I can select my pole and I can turn the foot. And that's what I want. So we can press A to select all, do Alt-R, clear rotations, Alt-G to clear grabs. And we're looking pretty good so far. I think that takes care of the leg. Let's go ahead and take care of the eyes. So I want to use bones to basically set up the eye movement. You don't really have to. This could be optional for your rigs depending on what you're doing, but I feel it's easier if you're trying to do like expressions or any type of fun stuff in your animation if you have separate controls over the eyes and whatnot. So to do that, I'm going to go to my edit mode, select the root bone, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate the root bone, and I'll put it near the eye. I'm going to press Z, go into wireframe, and I'm just going to do my best to kind of line this up. So I'm going to grab the head and move that inside the eye socket, and I'll grab the tail, move that forward here, come to front view. Oops. I'm going to select the entirety of the bone, grab it in the X, and just kind of move it out like that. And I think that looks pretty good. Come out of X-ray, back into material. I'm going to press F2, and I'm going to call this the eye left, with a capital L. Now to drive the bone movement for this one, we're going to need another pole. But with the eyes, I'm only going to use one pole bone. With the legs, I'm going to have two, because I want you could do two bones, that way you can make them like, make the eyes separate, I guess, if you're looking for that type of animation. Maybe for like a frog or something, I don't know. But in this case, I'm just going to do one. So to do that, I can just select off here, press E to extrude, lock it in the Y, And then I need this to be separate, so I'm gonna, because it's a controller bone, so I'm gonna press Alt P, clear the parent, and then I can just grab it in the Y. And I don't want my character to be too cross-eyed, so I'm going to push this bone forward quite a bit. And then I'm going to name this eyes pole. And I don't want to use left or right because I only want one bone. Pretty straightforward. Now to add bone constraints, remember, we need to go into pose mode. So make sure you select pose mode here. But if I select my eye bone here, I can add a constraint. This one, I think a simple track 2 works just fine. And it's very similar. We have to give it the armature, which is skelly, or whatever you name your armature. And then the bone, I'm just going to search pole, and you see the eyes pole come up. So I'll select that. And then for, you notice the bone kind of shifted up there. So the up axis that I wanted is Z. So I'll just select Z there. And then for the tracking, it looks like we got positive X, positive Z. I think Y positive is this way. So it should be positive Y. You can tell you get it right because when you select your pole and you move it around, the bone should follow it. And that's what you're looking for. If it's wrong, just go back to it and try some of the other ones and see if you can find, you know, the right axis that it's supposed to be on. That's why I typically like to leave the axis where you can see it. That way you can kind of, it makes it a little bit easier when you're setting up your rigs. But yeah, I think that'll be it for the eyes. So what we can do now is we can actually symmetrize our rig. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, press A, select all bones, option for armature at the top, and then do symmetrize. And you'll notice it builds out the rest of your mesh, or I'm sorry, your armature rig. And if you wanted to test it, you can go into pose mode, and you should be able to select all the different controls, and it should work just like you would expect it to, where I can control the root bone here, and I can do squats. You can also, if I rotate on the Y, you can make the skelly kind of move in, but there is an issue. So if you notice, if I grab, it doesn't move the eye socket, so we made a mistake. So what we have to do is go back to edit mode, we have to select this, and then the root, and Control P, and keep the offset. Same thing, shift, and then shift select the root, Control P, keep the offset. That way we have these relationship lines showing. So when we go into pose mode, we grab the skelly, everything inside the mesh should follow the root bone. The controllers we don't really care about. But that way when I actually, you know, rotate around, you see the eyes are gonna follow. And that's what we want. But this looks pretty good. So we got the top half of the model being driven through forward kinematics, and the bottom half being driven through a mix of inverse kinematics and forward kinematics. So now that we created the rig, we can now actually parent it to the mesh. I'm going to tab back into edit mode. There is one last thing we need to do. We need to set up, or we need to tell Blender that the controller bones should not deform the actual mesh. It's easy enough. You just select one controller bone at a time, and in the bone properties here, just uncheck deform. And then we're going to do that for each of the poles and the controllers. Uncheck that. Uncheck that there. Uncheck and uncheck. And that should be good. And now I think I'm going to go to my data properties. I'll get rid of the names, and I'll get rid of the axis for now. So it's just a simple little skeleton rig there. And I'm going to tab back into, actually control tab into object mode. Alright, so I'm going to show you how to parent this two different ways, because I know the eyes are going to give me trouble. This may not apply to you, but I'm going to show it to you anyways. Don't follow along for the next part. I'm going to go back into my armature, into edit mode, and I'm going to tell my eye bones not to deform really quick. But essentially you shift select your entirety of your mesh. So I have my body, and I'm going to shift select the eyes. So you can see the body and the eye selected. And then you shift select the armature last, in our case Skelly. When you control P, you'll notice that armature deform with 3 sub options. The one we want is with automatic weights. If you don't see this menu, it's because you probably didn't select the armature last. It wasn't your active or highlighted option. But when we do that, you can then click on the actual armature rig, so the Skelly, and then you can go back into pose mode, and you should notice that your mesh actually deforms. So you can actually begin to animate the actual mesh. And there might be issues with it where it doesn't deform correctly, and you might have to correct that through weight painting. Like right now, you'll notice the eyes aren't correct because we told those not to deform. We'll fix that in a second. But you can see my leg lifts up here. I can rotate these. I can point the knees. So you can do quite a bit. So the automatic weights will take care of most of the things. So if you have a basic model, you're probably going to be golden. But let me show you what happens if you have problems. So I'm going to select everything, do an Alt-G, Alt-R, and I'll tab back into, actually I'll just go into object mode. There we go. I'll select my skeleton, tab in edit mode, and I'm going to select my eye bones, set deform on, and tab back into object mode. I'm going to select my body, my eyeballs, and then my skeleton last. Control P. I'm going to choose automatic weights. And you notice I have quite a mess. So basically what's happening is, let me select the body, go into edit mode. Each of your vertex points gets assigned a weighting score. Typically, if it's normalized, it's between 0 and 1, and whatever value that gets assigned, it basically gets it to a bone. So like you can have one vertex have some weight in the top bone, some weight maybe in the root bone, some weight in the eye bones, you know, what have you. The automatic weights is basically doing that based on distance. So these center bones here are basically grabbing some of these weights. That's why the mesh is kind of deforming incorrectly. So we're going to have to basically reassign the weights through weight painting so we can kind of clean up this mess. But it's not too bad of a process. So what we do is we first select the skeleton, so it's entirely highlighted, or the armature, and then you shift select the part of the model that you want to fix. So in this case, my body's pretty messed up, so I'm going to select that last. That's my active selection. If I control tab, I have an option for weight paint, or you can come up here and select weight paint as well. And essentially, if you hold control, you can click on all the various bones and you can see the weight assignments that each one has. So you notice the eyes currently, the eye bones have some weight for the actual body, and they should have 0. They should only control the eyes, and that's kind of what's messing us up. So to make this easier, I am going to hide the eyes, and I'm going to press N to open my panel. I'm going to go into the tool menu. Under options, there's a fantastic feature called auto normalize. I recommend you check that. What that's going to do is when I add or subtract weights to a particular bone, it's going to add or subtract from any other bones that are trying to grab influence. So basically, it is possible. You typically should only have a value of 0 to 1, but it's possible to have more than 1. And that can sometimes get you into trouble. And you get weird, like when you're animating, your mesh is going to look it's going to deform oddly. So if you can keep each bone between 0 and 1, where they basically all add up to 1, you're going to be in a much better place. So I highly recommend doing auto normalize. But yeah, so you can go greater than 1. I just avoid it if you're doing it. I think starting off, I'm going to switch it from a mix brush to an add brush. And strength 1, weight 1 looks good. I'm going to start at the bottom, so I'm going to control click. And then I'm just going to do what kind of makes sense, which is, I think the bottom of the mesh should be pretty much weighted fully. And this is a bit of a tedious process, so you might just have to bear with me as I go through it. I might actually speed up this footage to make it easier for everyone here. And then typically what I'll do is, if you're having trouble painting, just move on to the next bone, and then just kind of go through and start assigning weights to that bone. And then you can come back, and as the mesh starts to correct and deform correctly, you'll be able to hit those other vertex points. And I'll show you another trick you can do as well. I think the trunk should be probably all assigned to that middle spine 1 bone. And just the reason it's so violent, and that's just the single vertex, right? That single vertex point is assigned to one of the eyes, and that's what's giving us trouble. Alright, so we'll go through here. And I think the eyes should be weighted well to the spine 1 bone. Another thing you can do is under your brush properties, there's a front faces only. You can uncheck that, and you can sometimes get the back vertices as if it was an X-ray. And it sometimes works a little bit better. It allows you to hit these tricky spots that it's just not allowing you to reach for whatever reason. Alright, that looks pretty good, so I'm going to put front faces back on. I'm going to press Control and click on the top bone. And then I'm going to try to weight paint the head part out. Like so. And for the most part, it depends on your model. Your automatic weights might just do a very good job, and you might not have this issue. I typically only have the issues when I'm doing eyes. Now another thing you can do too is you can actually control select the eye socket, switch your brush from an add, and do a subtract. And then for this one, I'm actually going to remove front faces, and then I have my eyes hidden, so I can actually make my brush big with just F and just paint everywhere I see, because there shouldn't be any weight or any influence at all. And I can press Control, click on this eye, and just delete any of those weights. And even if you delete the weights and you see it's still being pulled, that might be because that vertex may not have any weight to any bone, so it doesn't know where to go. That's sometimes why you need to jump back and forth between subtracting and adding, depending on how you're doing your weight painting. So it's a bit of a tedious process, but it's not terrible. So I'm going to Control click the center. I'm going to go back to front faces only, and I'm going to do a add. Make my brush a lot smaller now. And now, looking a little better. Alright, so I think I want this part to be pretty much all red around these center bands. I did a good job with the legs, so I don't think I have to worry about those. I'm gonna do just the face around the edges. I'll leave the top of the head for that top bone. Like I said before too, the more bones you add, the more control and more accurate you're going to be able to deform your mesh, but also the more work you're going to have to do not only in animating, but also in like cleanup, like with weight painting. Alright, and now this is looking pretty good. Take another stab at the bottom. And you can see my bottom got messed up just a tad. But all in all, not too terrible. I think that looks good. I don't think I want that back part, so I am actually going to switch this to a subtract. Bring that back down. I want that middle part to kind of control that piece there. And then I can just go back to brush, switch to add, and then make sure that part is dark red. Dark red being 100% influence, of course. All right. And I think that'll probably be good enough. So let's see how we made out. So I'm going to go back into object mode. I'm going to unhide my eyes. And I can select the armature or the skelly. And if I control tab, I'm in pose mode. So I can press G, grab, do some squats. You can see the knees kind of bend inward. So I can actually grab that in the X. Grab that in the X. You can see that works pretty good. And if you look at the eyes, you notice the eyes are actually keeping contact with my pole, which is exactly what I want. Because sometimes you can have fun where you're moving this, whoops, make your character cross-eyed or make them do funny animation things where they're in an idle animation, you're just moving the eyes around, like stuff like that. And then you can even rotate, grab it back up, rotate along the Y, and your character can get like a fun little walk animation. But you can see the rigging process isn't too bad. It does take a little bit of doing. You might have to correct with the weight painting, but you can get some pretty good realistic effects just with just a little bit of work. It's just with stuff like this, depending on how you set up your eyes, you have to remember to actually, wait a minute, did I? Oh, it's because I did it to the other bone. Yeah, there we go. Furrow his brow, maybe, but yeah. Alright everyone, I think we'll cut the video here to try to keep it a little bit short, but I hope you found some informative value in this topic, but as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.